Hello, I'm Gregory Campbell, Director of Marketing and Communications at Lyric Opera of Kansas City, and welcome to the second episode of Lyric Opera Pitmasters, where we explore music making and storytelling that happens below the stage in our productions. I am joined by my good friend Raymond Santos, Principal Clarinet of the Kansas City Symphony. And thank you so much for joining me today, Raymond.
Thank you for having me.
So you're going to be playing Principal Clarinet in our production of La Traviata. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means to be a principal of the section? What does that mean?
So the main thing that principal means in all of the orchestra, but especially like the woodwind and brass section is that you play all of the main solos. So there's a very large clarinet solo in Traviata, and so I'll be playing that. Additionally, the principal is kind of just the leader of the section artistically, and so if there's an issue of articulation or any sort of like dynamic or interpretation, usually the principal kind of sets that standard, and the other members of the section just kind of listen to what the principal is doing and latch on to what they're doing to make it sound like really cohesive. So that's the gist of it.
Is that role any different between when you're playing on stage at Helzberg Hall or when you're playing in the pit, or is it basically kind of the same job being principal clarinetist?
I would say it's pretty much exactly the same. I mean, just because, really the only difference between playing on stage in Helzberg Hall and playing in the pit is just that the audience can't see you as well.
Right.
that's really, and every other aspect of it, it's essentially the same. I mean, of course, like playing in opera is a little bit different than playing with ballet because there's no musical interaction really with what's happening on stage with ballet, obviously, because they're not making sound.
Right.
In opera, you have to be very reliant upon the conductor because obviously there's give and take between the singers and the orchestra. And where I sit in the pit, the clarinets sit right under the stage actually, and it's very difficult for me to hear the singers.
Right.
So I'm very reliant on the conductor to like give me visual cues as to what's going on stage. And so that's probably like the main difference, but in terms of like my responsibilities as principal clarinet, it's really exactly the same.
Great. So and then we're going to talk about a big moment in Traviata for you. But I'd also wanted to take a moment just to hear about your musical journey and how you came to Kansas City and how long you've been here. And
so, well, I grew up in Westchester, Ohio, which is a suburb of Cincinnati, like 30 minutes north of downtown Cincinnati. And I started clarinet in 5th grade. I was extremely excited because I wanted to push the buttons on the clarinet. It had really nothing to do with music. I just wanted to push the buttons on it.
Right.
And then I started playing it, and I was like, oh, I actually really like the way that this sounds. Okay, so that worked. And then when I graduated high school, I went to the University of Southern California, where I got my bachelor's degree in clarinet performance. There's a very reputable clarinet professor. His name is Yehuda Gilad, and he teaches at USC. So that's why I went all the way from Cincinnati to Los Angeles. After I did my bachelor's degree, I played in a training orchestra in Miami Beach, Florida, called the New World Symphony. I was there for 2 years, and then my second year there, I flew to Kansas City because they had an audition for principal clarinet, and I won the audition on my birthday.
oh, wow.
Yeah. And that was April 1st, 2008 is when that audition was. Well, it was a 2-day audition. So it was March 31st and then April 1st. But the day where it ended was my birthday. And then I moved to Kansas City in the fall of 2008, and I've been here ever since.
Wow. So are you really superstitious about your birthday now?
It's funny because I got to play the Mozart Clarinet Concerto with the orchestra this year, and the first performance of it was on my birthday.
Oh, wow.
So my birthday actually has had kind of like a couple of like big career moments.
Yeah.
For me. So it seems to be a good day.
Wow, that's great. And actually, we were giving Raymond a tour here of the Lyric Opera's facilities. And we have a few stage doors and actually pieces of the stage from the old Lyric Theater. when you saw the stage, what is it you told me?
Well, that's the stage that I won my audition on.
On your birthday.
Yeah, so I actually, that's like my fondest memory of the Lyric Theater, the old building. Is I remember, because there were 4 rounds to that audition, and I remember walking on and off stage, 4 times, and there's a proctor to the side because there's a screen up because the committee can't see you, and they to keep it anonymous, you can't say anything. So all the communication, if the candidate has something like a question or something, has to happen to the proctor. And so it's just like you and this random person on stage. And so I think just because there's no audience that you can look at, you're just very hyper aware of your surroundings. And I just remember looking at the stage, and it's so funny because you have like fragments of it in there. And I remember how dark it looked because it was just like painted black.
Right.
And it was a little bit nostalgic, but also eerie in a way. But yeah, that's like a fond memory I have from the Lyric Theater.
That's really great. So you talked about the buttons on the clarinet, and I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how the clarinet works.
Yes, so the clarinet has a lot of components, actually, maybe more, even though it's not the largest instrument, it has probably the most components of any instrument in the orchestra, really, because you have the reed, which vibrates against the mouthpiece. You have the ligature, which holds the reed onto the mouthpiece. And then we have 4 components of the clarinet itself. And what's kind of interesting is that when you buy a clarinet, you get kind of these 3 pieces here, the bell, the lower joint, and the upper joint. And then it will come with a barrel, which is this part right here. But very few clarinetists actually play on the barrel that it comes with. So we're constantly like fiddling around with equipment because I have a specific barrel that I like to use on this clarinet that I found independent of the clarinet.
Wow.
I have a mouthpiece that I went through like, tens, hundreds of mouthpieces to find, and they only last for like a year. So
wow, really?
I redo that process like every year. This ligature also took me a long time for me to find, and reeds generally, for clarinet players, if I play on a reed like the same reed every day, it won't last more than 5 to 10 days if I'm lucky.
Okay.
So everything is just kind of in this constant state of degradation. And then the clarinet itself has to be replaced like every 10 years. So
Wow.
there's a lot of just kind of like, moving pieces in terms of like assembling the actual instrument. But, we blow through the mouthpiece and the reed vibrates against the mouthpiece, and that's what makes the sound. And then, of course, the clarinet is basically just a wooden tube. And so as we place our fingers on the keys and move them down and push keys that close holes, you make the tube longer. And so the air is traveling further down the instrument, and the longer the tube, the lower the pitch. So that's the easiest way I could describe basically how the clarinet works.
So you said that you go through a clarinet every 5 to 10 years, is that what
Oh yeah, so I have
Really?
purchased. I added it up at one point, and I've gone through like 12 clarinets already in my career. So the thing that's kind of weird about the clarinet is that, and actually I think this is kind of similar for trumpets, because Stephen, I think, maybe brought this up. Clarinet players, we always have a set of clarinets. So we always have a B-flat clarinet, which is the one that I have here, and which is the one that the clarinet solo is on in Traviata. And we also have an A clarinet, and the A clarinet is a half step lower than the B-flat clarinet, and it's just like an inch taller. It essentially feels kind of mostly the same when you play it. And so we always have one set of clarinets. You need a pair if you're going to play in an orchestra. And then, unfortunately, because they are made of wood and they're constantly exposed to moisture and warm air and humidity, and when you blow warm, moist air through the instrument, the bore actually expands, and then when that's not happening, it contracts. And so it's constantly just like being subjected to all of these elements, and over time it ends up warping, and the sound just becomes less desirable. So yeah, it's just like I said, it's a constant like exercise in degradation.
Wow, yeah, because brass players and string players, they often will play their whole career on the same instrument. Is oboe the same way then? Do they?
Yeah, oboe's the same way. They go through a lot of instruments. Flute players don't have to worry about it because their instruments are made of metal, so they're lucky there. Interestingly, even though the bassoon is made of wood, they'll have theirs for like their entire career.
Oh, wow.
And I'm not quite sure why that is that way, but.
Yeah. Or if in the
They
case of
lucked out.
Lizzo, she's got the crystal flute.
Yeah,
right? So
yeah, the very fancy
she probably doesn't
crystal
have
flute.
to.
Yeah,
You've been in the orchestra since 2008, and so that means you've been playing in Lyric Opera of Kansas City productions since 2008.
Yeah.
So that's a good long time.
yeah.
Any standouts of productions you've played here?
Yes, so my first was Bohème,
Okay.
Puccini. That was my very first, and it actually might have been like some of the first music that I played in the orchestra, just even when I joined the orchestra. Like it probably, I think rehearsals were in the very first month.
Wow.
So I have fond memories of that. I also really liked when we did Nixon in China. And that, to date, that is one of the most difficult clarinet parts I've played in like any piece.
Anywhere, anytime. Wow.
And I like that. I like the challenge of it, but it actually was so much, there were so many notes and it was so virtuosic that when we finished the run, I had a massive flare-up of carpal tunnel syndrome in my left hand, and I woke up the next morning and I couldn't move my fingers.
Wow.
So, but that's not the reason why I remember it. I remember it just because I thought it was like a super awesome experience, and I love that opera.
Yeah.
And then every time we play Traviata, that's all happy. It's just so much. I can't really explain maybe why it's my favorite, but it's so much fun to play. It's so dramatic. I think the orchestra writing is fantastic. I really like Verdi a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say those are kind of the ones that like stick out the most.
Yeah, and and I asked Steven this question too, and I knew what he was going to say before. I think I know what you're going to say because we were talking about this the other night. But is there a particular opera you would love to play, if like that you haven't gotten to play that you would?
Yes, I would love to do Salome or what's the other opera?
Electra.
I've done Electra.
Oh, you have played
Oh yeah,
Electra.
I've done
Okay.
Electra. I did Electra at Tanglewood. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
That was super fun. But why am I blanking on the other big Strauss? Rosenkavalier.
Rosenkavalier,
Yeah, I would
got it.
love to do Rosenkavalier.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I'm really into Strauss's operas. I think
Yeah.
actually his operas are his best work.
Yeah.
Of course, the orchestral tone poems are fantastic, but I
Right.
think the operas are on a completely different level.
Yeah, totally.
So I would always, that would be fantastic. I know a lot of people would love to do like the Ring cycle
Right.
once before they die. It's a little much for me. I think I'll be okay.
Yeah. A lot of noise down there.
Yeah, and they're definitely like a marathon.
Yeah. So moving on to Traviata and more generally about the clarinet in opera, and one of the things I've noticed is in opera and orchestral music as well, is that the clarinet is often featured in very sad moments. In maybe in in an orchestral piece, but in an opera too. And actually, I was just thinking, you played in Tosca, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The end of the last season of Lyric Opera was Tosca, which was just a fabulous performance, and I love that music. And again, you have like this just really crushingly sad moment that you have to play at the start of the third act there, and I'm wondering what it's like being in the pit and knowing that it's basically up to you to create sort of that emotional context for the audience. Like, that seems like a lot of responsibility. What's that like for you?
I mean, I love it. I thrive on it. I think that's just kind of like that's just kind of the mentality of maybe being a principal player, is that, oh, there's a moment for me to control the mood. Well, I will seize it.
Yeah.
And the clarinet has one thing that the clarinet is really skilled at, actually, is there is a very wide dynamic range for the clarinet. It's definitely not the loudest instrument on the stage, but it is unparalleled in its ability to play softly.
Yeah.
The clarinet can literally come in from nothing and fade out literally into nothing. I mean, like there's you can go like quadruple, quintuple P all the way to zero, essentially. And I think that kind of naturally lends itself to kind of like pathos, to melodic lines that are kind of more sad or full of, low moments in life. Mm-hmm. And that's definitely the way that Verdi wrote the solo as well, because it's written in soft dynamics. The loudest dynamic is piano, which is a soft dynamic, and then he actually puts halfway through the solo to go down to pianissimo. Wow. Pianissimo is very soft, obviously. The clarinet can go even way below that. But there's something about this, the music's in a minor key, and you have kind of this soft, legato, even sound, and that's something that the clarinet just naturally does. And so I think that's why you get a lot of that type of writing for the clarinet. It seems like the clarinet and the oboe seem to get those type of lines, although I think more frequently in opera it's the clarinet, whereas on stage in the concert hall it might be a little bit more the oboe.
Yeah. So the solo, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in the story when the solo happens?
So what's happening in the story is the main character, Violetta, is writing a letter to her lover Alfredo because she's basically been pressured to leave the relationship, to end the relationship. And obviously it's not something that she wants to do, but she's going to do it because she believes it's in the best interest for him and his family. So she's heartbroken, right? She's going to be ending this relationship. She doesn't want to. And that's when this solo comes in that really kind of portrays that mood, that heartbreak, that kind of crushing moment of the love of my life is basically I'm having to hurt this person and not be with the love of my life anymore. It's kind of a double whammy. So that's what the clarinet's really portraying that mood, because there's no singing actually happening. It's purely just to help establish that mood, that devastation of what's happening.
Right. I was thinking about, we talk a lot about in this industry about how do these stories connect to modern life, and everybody's been through a breakup, right? Like everybody sort of knows what that feels like. So it's a very human. I mean, we've all probably written breakup notes, although now it's probably a breakup text, right? So,
oh my God.
But it's a human moment that anybody can relate to because we've all experienced, breakups and so it's a really, really wonderful moment. So we were talking earlier, and this is a really famous clarinet moment, and opera houses will ask clarinet players to play it and stuff. So can you tell us what makes it difficult to play, just technically what's sort of happening when you're playing the solo?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that are challenging about it. The first is simply just establishing the mood. It needs to be very convincing. Since it is a very important moment in the opera, if you're going to be playing it in an audition, the committee wants to be able to be certain that you can help sustain that type of mood, that you can create that atmosphere. So that's really, right off the bat, like the biggest challenge with the solo is just simply creating a mood. And then in terms of like more technical aspects of it that make it difficult is because it is such a soft solo, there are some large intervals or large leaps between notes that have to happen. And you want the interval between the two notes to be as smooth as possible. And when you're playing something really quietly, that means you're putting less air through the instrument, and it can be harder to get that sense of smoothness, or what we refer to as legato in music. It can be really hard to get that nice, even legato, especially when it goes down to pianissimo. So that's also, in terms of like the technical difficulty of it, that's really the main challenge, is to just make sure that your air is super, super steady, even though you're not putting a lot of volume of air through the instrument.
Right.
So I would say between the mood and the legato aspect of it, those are really kind of the two most challenging things. But it is a lot of fun to play. There are some solos that are really famous just because they're devilishly difficult, and you play them in concert and you're like, I did it, but that wasn't fun. This is actually like a really enjoyable moment, and it's well written for the clarinet.
And I actually just I pulled up what she says right before the solo starts. She says, "And now to write to him, what can I say? Who will give me courage?"